Thank you. In fact, what we are trying to focus is to understand the way how governments think and act, and the way how they see technologies which are rapidly developing and arising. I recall very well when I was a small child, my grandfather told me that, Linnar boy, if only tool in your hand is a hammer, then all the problems look like nail. As a young boy, I did not understand blah, 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 grandfather's code, not euphemism, but now I understand that if only tool in my hand is something, then I'm trying to solve all the problems with that tool I have. And I recall very well when I was advisor to Prime Minister in Estonia, and we had a company coming to us saying that WAP, WAP, Wireless Application Protocol, this is a technology of the future. This is something your government should adopt immediately, all over the public administration. This is a technology which will deliver public administration, e-governance to all your citizens. And before that and after that, I have been so many hype curves around the public administration. Right now, not only here, but also in other events, we see prime ministers and delegations coming and asking, where can I buy a blockchain? When can I start using cryptocurrency, please? Can my country start doing ICOs now? Because they seem all kind of self-fulfilling prophecies about the bright future. This is what I would like to have with practitioners working in the field of AI in practice and big data. Mihkel, Niels, who has been working with the big organizations and also public institutions on their digital transformation. And of course, Andrew, who has been traveling, globe-trotting around the world, looking for any possible solution that actually could be beneficial use for kind of repeating and remarking as a case for the rest of the world. Let me start with you, Andrew. When globe-trotting the world and looking to the different governments and how they adopt technology and how they try to manage with digital transformation, do you see that there is an influence of hype around them, kind of technological hype, which is just blurring their practical, applicable vision? And is there a hope for technology to solve all the problems?
Well, there's always hype, obviously, but I guess probably a better way of putting it is there more hype in government than in the public than in the private? And I think probably more hype in private because there's more money to be made, and so there's a reason for hype. In the startup world, say when it comes to cryptocurrency and ICOs, a huge amount of money is being made now out of the hype. So there's a reason why people drive the hype. I think when it comes to government, there's much less so. So the hype is more in the hands of people who don't quite, as you suggested, don't always understand the technology. But that's the job of events like this, to educate government officials into understanding the reality, the limits, the practicalities of the technology. I gave my speech about Estonia, so I'm not going to repeat the stuff on Estonia. I'd say another really good example, probably an even better example of how government is using technology effectively is Singapore. Now, I'm a little ambivalent about the politics in Singapore and the democratic intent of the government, but certainly Singapore's Smart City initiative is extremely impressive. And I think they understand realistically what AI is and what blockchain is and how these technologies can be used to empower their citizens and improve public services. I know in Singapore there's a lot of services which have been built around public infrastructure. So I would say that it depends on the government. I didn't go everywhere. I globe-trotted. And I'm also impressed with the way in which government understands and can regulate technology. Another chapter in my book is made up of an interview with Margaret Vestager, who's the EU Commissioner of Antitrust and Competition. And I think she's done an extremely good job understanding how to curb the powers of unaccountable big tech companies like Apple or Google or Facebook. So overall, I think we live in a culture where people enjoy bashing government and denigrating the public realm and public services, but my experience has been generally positive.
Have you seen in your road any societies where people demand from government be innovative, do more, use technology, use the latest, most modern technologies because we deserve the best? Have you seen any country like that, where society is giving a push, where governments will be taken off from their post because they are not innovative enough?
I think America's a little bit like that, certainly in the way in which there are groups in Silicon Valley. I can think of one, people like Tim O'Reilly and his Open Government Initiative. And there's a lot of dissatisfaction, and I think quite understandable in the United States, because government is so dysfunctional and so distant in Washington, D.C., and often not accountable, and smart people don't go into government. So the question, I know in Estonia, this is not just to get you into bed, but smart people go into government in Estonia. There's a moving staircase between entrepreneurs and government officials. Sikut, the current CTO, I had lunch with him yesterday, an incredibly talented person who now is committed to the public good. Taavi Kotka was this legendary CEO, remarkably innovative, eccentric, brilliant guy who's probably, with you, sort of the father of many of these reforms. Now I think he's in the private realm. So I think it really reflects the quality of people in government service. The problem in America is it's not a technology problem. It's not an investment problem. It's just that public service has been so denigrated, it's so badly paid, it's so vilified in the culture that anyone with any brain would never imagine going into public service. They go to Silicon Valley and they become an entrepreneur. Now, under Obama, there was a little bit more of that moving staircase between companies like Google and public service, but I think in the new administration, that's absent. So I would say in America, but of course, America people, the idea of the consumer and the citizen has been collapsed and confused, and there's very little accountability on the part of citizens or consumers. They think everything should be delivered automatically on a silver plate to them. So I would also suggest that it's government's role to temper the expectations of citizens, consumers, and we live in a new age where the idea of a top-down government solution that delivers products or services or platforms or apps to citizens doesn't exist. I think it needs to be much more of a sort of reciprocal arrangement. Smaller government, nimble government is much more important. So at the local level in the US, I spent some time with Gina Raimondo, the governor of Rhode Island, and they're actually been inspired by the Estonian model to institute a series of quite interesting technological reforms and services for their residents. The same is true in California. So I think the real problem often lies at the federal level, particularly in the US, but it's got nothing to do with technology. It just reflects the dysfunctionality, the paralysis, the crisis of central government in the US.
Niels, have you ever been approached, has McKinsey been ever approached by a government coalition or prime minister saying that I have elections coming, help me, help me to make digital transformation to the top of my agenda, and then I will win elections because my society doesn't care so much about the sewage treatment or the water or the public transportation or the pension reforms or the healthcare, but all they want is digital.
I think that may be stretching it a bit too far to say that we have been approached by governments in an election context, but we are definitely being approached by governments who needs help to digitize and who want help to digitization of society. So I think it is becoming a big issue. I think there is, just coming back to your question from before, there is hype. I think that there's also some misunderstanding. I will agree with Andrew that there's a number of countries where civil servants are actually very good, very skilled. However, understanding of technology is not always complete. And I think that also there is an exaggeration of what technology can actually do for you. I was having a meeting with one CEO of a large agency who was implementing an ERP system, and he actually had the vision that when this system was up and functioning, he could abolish his finance department. And we tried to tell him that yes, there's so much that IT can do, but there is still a reality, and there's still a lot of processes driven by people that is actually the core of how you are running your institution. So I think it's extremely important to align expectations, to understand what can technology do, what does technology actually stand on, and where can it add value. And I think that's kind of a core discussion we have in private companies, but even more in the public sector.
Is there more hype in private to public organizations? What do you feel right now? Well, Silicon Valley is far, far away from us. In Scandinavia, in Northern Europe, it's not so much about raising money around the hype and valuations, and there is not so much concentration. But let's make a kind of a distinction between startup company, an established private organization with its history, with its legacy, who wants to go through some sort of digital transformation, and then the public institution.
I think that I will agree with Andrew that hype is bigger in the private sector. I think more is at stake. If you kind of miss out on the next technology, you may be dead quite soon. And I think that a number of examples over the last 10 to 15 years has shown that speed has picked up. So you really need to understand, and the importance of being first mover is also super, super important. And this is kind of adding to the hype. I find that in government and in the public sector, there's more an anxiety to be left behind and be seen as not keeping pace, not being modern, more than the risk of actually dying in the competition. So I think that's how I would say the situation is between private and public sector. I would also say that I find that the private sector is reaching more out to startups and to small companies, not only doing partnerships, but also giving access to data, giving access to APIs without charging anything. Simply to be there, to be part of the environment, to be an relevant player, to get to know the people, to get the people to know you, all those kind of things, being part of the ecosystem, which I think this would be something that government could obviously do.
I don't mean to interrupt, but what Singapore are doing is exactly that, providing these public APIs for developers, and actually the idea of a public, this sort of common API is much more suitable actually to the public than the private market, because everyone has access to it. So there are exceptions to that.
And there are also good models, especially the way how you build around the public APIs, the potential interface for the future innovators and the better service interface developers. Mihkel, you are breathing data, and you are the one who is kind of 21st century meme is that data is a new crude oil of 21st century and blah, blah, blah. But you are really using that on a daily basis, and in the same time, vast majority of the examples, practical examples you're building, are built around public databases, public data. How difficult has it been to deal with expectation management? Imagine you go to the tax department board and say that, hello, I'm coming from Tartu University, I can manage your data and squeeze out of the data those couple of fruitful, meaningful drops of knowledge which you can use for managing your work better? Are they saying that come back in 50 years or go to speak another Martian?
I would say it has clearly changed in the last couple of years.
Couple of years, kind of, when you started, 2015 or 2010, or when you went first time and said that government, I can do something useful with your data.
Okay, let's say in the last 5 years. Then.
Okay, cool.
Because everyone is collecting data. That's basically a given by default, pretty much. What they still have problems with is actually putting sort of questions to the data. Because, I mean, the expectations obviously tend to be that we would like to have some fancy AI system, and when you go to them and say that, okay, this is what you actually have gathered, and maybe you simply need a thing that works in Excel and simply extends this trend line. That's what you need. You don't need any AI because it's not a problem at that level. But I would say that the attitude definitely has changed in a sense that they want to provide a better service to a citizen. But when I now sort of put on the hat of the citizen and sit across the table of these current institutions, then I would say they should take it a step further and think about, I mean, obviously, if you own a process, you would like people to use it and you want to develop it. But how about thinking of getting rid of this process or this service? Because I, as a citizen, I don't fancy interacting with the government too much. I don't particularly like it. If it's possible to bring it down to the minimum, I would go for it as a citizen. Obviously, the service owner does not think in these terms. But if you think of the service that the large, sort of the majority of us, I would say any government provides, government-provided these services, these tend to be life cycle related, or maybe seasonal. Let's say tax declarations. I mean, people do it on a seasonal basis, and in Estonia it's really fast, a couple of clicks. But I mean, why do I even need to do that? If it's so regular, so fast, so simple, maybe I shouldn't do it. Maybe it can be done automatically. And if you think about the life cycle of a person, I mean, when does the demand for an e-service start? Actually or e-services, not probably at birth, sometime before birth, because sometime after conceiving, because the mother develops some medical needs. And there's a record now in the healthcare system that actually there's a new person coming. It probably ends sometimes after that, not death, because you need to get all your inheritance stuff and things like that into order. And there's a life cycle in between of that. And life cycle, and we all know that, that's very predictable. So maybe just the data that the governments are collecting, they could actually plan that all better. Not like, I'm not saying like from cradle to grave type of service, but these individual contexts that we have, seasonal or life cycle related, actually reduce the need for these contacts even further because it's plannable. I mean, why do I need to sign up a kid for school when the government actually knows 6 years in advance that this person now is here, and in 6 years is coming to that specific school? Maybe simply 2 years in advance, drop an email to the parents and say, hey, you have a kid, lives in that area. We have taken into account that this kid is now coming with this demographic group. We know the class sizes, and these are the options.
Have you tried this pitch to any government on the planet Earth?
That's the trouble. I mean, you basically say that, hey, I mean, these are the ideas out there.
They are saying, I have a database, I want AI on top of that database. Don't come to me with something which is radically going to make life better. Just solve my problem. I don't care about the Viik solution.
True, and the second problem is that you said, okay, but how about the solution that gets rid of the need for this service? And this is really something hard to sort of present because hey, we have now built something where there's actually no need for us anymore, to a certain degree. Obviously, I'm exaggerating here a bit, but how to present and sell something by a politician that isn't there anymore, meaning that you cannot say that we can declare taxes in 90 seconds, because we don't need to declare taxes anymore. That's something that is not visible anymore, and it's really hard to sell. And well, there's probably a line where these institutions actually say that, okay, this is going a bit too far. But technically, I would say the mindset is definitely coming. Given the amount of data that has been now obviously collected, it's possible technically already. Whether the government so radically wants to change, that probably is not there yet.
Andrew, about the awareness, the general awareness, I have seen in my life a politician coming to me and asking, why can't our people go to elections and vote on Facebook, because in Facebook you can create a poll or Doodle. Doodle is, everybody's using Doodle. Everybody knows how to use a Doodle. Why can't I email to all my society a Doodle link? And they can start voting. And it will be ready without any election organizational structures. So I'm talking about kind of awareness, what layers and levels you have facing.
We can snigger at government on that, but that's your job to educate them. I mean, right? You have to explain to them that Google and Facebook have actually done a very good job pretending that they are public services. So one of the reasons a lot of people
think public services without any taxpayers' money.
People like me have spent the last 15 years telling people, actually, that's not true. They're scamming you, and that this is, we've been turned into the product, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. So that's your job to tell the politicians. I mean, they're paying you, right?
You mean, who's paying? Expert. Politicians never pay. Google gives me a free service and...
Right. Well, you're the consultant. I think there is an interesting opportunity for government. Here's the big opportunity for government. It's still maybe slightly too abstract for practitioners like yourself. But I think the real long-term opportunity is not so much this sort of activist top-down government, but government giving, if you like, the stamp of a public realm to new kinds of organizations. So the new big thing in Silicon Valley, amongst sort of pioneering technologists like Tim Berners-Lee, is this movement called re-decentralization, which is trying to re-architect the web and applications so that the big companies don't dominate. So rather than having Uber, for example, where you have a big fat company, or YouTube, a big fat company sitting between the provider of services and the consumer, you can have technology that will enable a rider and a driver to connect directly. I think the opportunity for government is in the creation of digital public space. That's what's most missing from the internet. And with the Google and Facebook examples, they are classically privatized walled gardens applications, especially Facebook, which present themselves as public, but are anything but public. We've seen it with the example in India, where Facebook said, well, we're going to be really generous. We're going to give everyone free internet, as long as you sign up with us. And of course, when they signed up with Facebook for free internet, the free internet was actually Facebook. You couldn't even get Google on it. So that forced the Indian government to pass its own network neutrality law that made this illegal. So I think there is a really important role for government, but it's in the creation of public space. Look how long it took in capitalism and industrialization to create public space. This is the big challenge for government. And I think it's essential. It's not just a public service. It's the key to a civilized online world. It's a key to a place where we're not being advertised all the time wherever we go. It's like a park. It's the equivalent of a park or a public space in the city. I mean, the Estonians understand this. The problem in America in particular is there's always been a crisis of public space. And that's, again, an area where I think Europeans can teach Americans something. The Americans lag behind on much of this. They lag behind in the way in which government is regulating. So I think Europeans, and maybe the Estonians, can take a lead on the shaping the architecting of public space, using the latest technology, whether it's re-decentralization technology or blockchain. All these new technologies can come together in terms of creating public space.
Niels, when not only working with governments, but on e-governance, but the broader term, digital transformation, it is more than just redesigning public administration. It's impact to the digital, to all society. A bit more than half a year ago, your colleague James Mihkel gave a presentation in front of all the heads of European Union here in Tallinn in Digital Summit, and I wonder how many governments recognize the big shift of digital transformation being not just something which reshapes the way how government and public administration is functioning, that this means something more. It means an as radical change to the employment market as capitalism did, as urbanization, as manufacturing did once.
I think that many governments recognize this at the abstract level. But I think translating it to how they go about doing their business, it is quite a big step to take, and I think that's what a lot of governments are actually struggling doing.
But let's put it now in practice. What does digital transformation in the broad sense mean to the governments, and what are the kind of couple of practical steps they need to start addressing?
I think that when this whole digitization started like 20 years ago, it was very much about digitizing what we already is doing. So it was not like redesigning what we're doing, it was just digitizing the processes we already had. And I think one key lesson, one key takeaway is that you need to redesign the way you're working in order to actually leverage all the benefits from technology. I think one thing that government should really be aware of is we made from McKinsey a very large study on that we call Future of Work, and this study demonstrated that between 30 and 40% of all activities today in the labor market can actually be automated. So this is going to completely change the whole labor market. It's going to be a challenge or an opportunity, whether you can put it both ways, but it's definitely going to challenge almost everybody working today. There will be some jobs that will completely disappear, but what our analysis shows is that will be quite few. On the other hand, almost everybody will be influenced by the automation. So a large amount of activities will be automated within, say, the next 10 years, and most people on the labor market will have to adjust. So
10 years, it means that we are still on labor market.
Hopefully,
it's
yeah.
not. We are not talking about 100 years or the kind of.
It's in a very short period of time, definitely. I mean, and we're already seeing it. And I think this is something that the government should take stock of and say, okay, how does our population look? What kind of skills and competence do they have? What kind of activities will be automated? So what should we do to re-educate and to reallocate and to reskill our workforce? I think this is something that government should start thinking about right now.
By the way, in Silicon Valley, when people say 10 years, it means they have no idea. I mean, unless...
I agree, because...
We're in Estonia.
No, we can't even predict. Even we
Tomorrow,
in Estonia are not predicting for the next 3 years the technologies we are going to use.
Right. Because you have no idea, because you have no idea what's in the pipe, right?
Precisely, because we are just learning and when we are learning, we don't know today what we know tomorrow. And then when we know it tomorrow, because we have learned, we are starting to do it.
And I think that's one of the big struggles of government officials, is they're used to working in a much more sort of quantifiable way, with stuff that says, okay, well, we know in 5 or 10 years this is where we're going to be. And you just can't know with technology.
I think that's very true, but just one thing is whether the technology is actually there. Another thing is whether it is implemented, and does it actually have any influence? And I think the Silicon Valley way of thinking is that, okay, this is possible in principle, so it's already here. But that's not how. But, and maybe eventually it will happen, probably in another way that it looks like now. But I think what we are seeing in many governments trying to implement new technologies, so that could be robotics or artificial intelligence or machine learning, we see a number of pilots, but they never scale. So they kind of find, okay, this activity is actually possible to automate or to do it by an algorithm, but then it stops. It doesn't scale, because if you want it to scale, you need to transform the organization. You need to transform your people, you need to transform your organization, you need to transform your processes. And this is something that you don't do overnight. This is actually something that takes years.
Mihkel, we have been talking also about the time horizons. The opportunity of processing digital data, well-structured digital data with a good time series, gives me actually as an opportunity to have a better glance on the kind of real-time economy interrelations and next second, next 10 minutes. But our public administration and governments are not interested what happens tomorrow or what happens in next 5 minutes. They are rather interested in what happens in 5 to 10 years' time. And isn't there a big clash between the opportunities given by data science and AI? You actually could restructure and redo your organizations and your processes to respond in real time, and rather they expect you still to deliver a plan for next 10 years' time.
Yeah, very valid point, because if you think about what this technology enables us now to do, is basically to do real-time policy, also impact analysis, meaning you change something in a small sort of subsection of the economy, see what happens, beneficial or not beneficial outcome change fast as the data comes in, and then reconfigure, introduce a different type of policy. Basically run experiments on the society on a limited scale. This previously wasn't possible, or at least it took some time to basically see what's going to happen. So that thanks to the data gathering, it is now possible to drastically shift this policy cycle, shorten this policy cycle. And I would say that the benefits clearly are there in terms of more efficiency, more efficient use of public resources. But when we look at the actual types of e-services that are put into place, then I agree with what you basically said, is that, let's say, I would say that we have three generations of services that are in place. The one where simply convert the paper-driven process into a digital process. The other one where it's basically also you get rid of paper but start to share data. And the third one where you start to predict things. And the predictions, I mean, the third generation clearly is there already in the private sector, in the public sector not yet. But the prediction is less accurate the longer the time frame. So the expectations are, yes, long-term, but you see that the actual benefits, where you could really see a huge difference, are short-term, small things that basically shave off 10% of the budget. I mean, that's actually huge already. That bring these small efficiency gains everywhere. And in general, in total, that actually adds up to something big, but it's not sort of presentable in a way that we have this new fancy piece of technology that's going to completely change everything. We're going to have a completely new mode of working. I would say that's all hype. I mean, the benefit actually comes from small things, immediate things, and not even this life cycle, but actually this actual contact point where you can redesign knowing the life cycle. These small things. I don't know if I answered your question, but there's a
yeah, I understood. The most important is that we need to note the fact that the AI super benefits, the digital data processing super benefits right now are in managing things real time, having an ability to have immediate feedback. However, the systems, the governance and the public administration is not fit to digest the real-time feedback. They are very slow beasts, and they would rather expect that statistical information comes to me next year, third quarter, and then I will see and look how it really performed my policy. Nobody is ready for kind of real-time policy making, real-time regulations.
True, and regulations, that's where the sort of problem lies in the same solutions that we did for the Estonian Tax and Customs Board. There was actually a legal analysis done as well, and I mean, believe it or not, the legal scholars and lawyers had to evaluate what is the legal power of a statistical forecast or a probability score. And they said there is no legal power, cannot be used as a single sort of piece of evidence to make a decision, but can only be used as sort of the help in making a decision, so the human needs to make a decision now, even though the human tends to be not so efficient. So the legal environment simply doesn't allow basically anything in that direction yet, period.
But they still are buying services from astrologists, and those are not legally binding to predict the future around the stars, and it's still sometimes very valuable and very, very highly ranked policy-making instrument. And they can't, and then they are starting analyzing around the kind of legal effectiveness of the data science. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are getting close with the end of our 2 days conference with this panel, and soon we are about to hear the last words. Before concluding this panel, I would like, gentlemen, to pick your brain a little bit about the future. And the future topic of this conference, what is, in your opinion, in 2019, when we are again going to host 70, 80, 90 plus governments in Tallinn on a similar type of event, what do you think should be in the focus of the agenda? This year we took digital citizen and citizens and services and infrastructure technologies around those citizens to the focus of our agenda. Where should we put the focus in 2019? What will happen between now and next 9 months, and what is it what we need to give out to the audience?
Should I start?
Please.
I would say that cyber security should be at the center of your considerations. I think with the world becoming more and more digital, we're all kind of taking it for granted that we have a digital world. We see that cybersecurity is super important. We've seen some massive attacks and some massive costs for companies and governments, and this will only get worse. So I think this is something that we should really take serious.
Do you agree? Do you like the idea, cybersecurity? Mihkel, Andrew?
I mean, I would agree in a sense that what this advancement of technology has shown, that we not only can attack this digital infrastructure and the data, but actually also hack other physical stuff. Let me give you an example. I mean, the famous example of hacking paper-based elections in Canada. That was already in 2000, I think, if I remember back. I mean, now everyone is worried, let's say in Estonia, where you have a e-voting system in place, that you can, obviously you have verification tools, you need verification tools, etc., because the information is in a digital format, meaning it's actually attackable easier. I mean, 2000 in Canada, there was a robocall scandal where a phone center called, selected a set of voters, and a pre-recorded message said that, hey, this is Elections Canada, your polling station address has changed from this to that, which was fake. So a lot of people went to a wrong address and didn't vote. And it was possible technically because of, I mean, it's possible now thanks to technology, you can hack all the kinds of paper-based things as well. So it's a holistic problem that applies now to absolutely everything. I mean, all paper-based elections at a certain stage move the information into some sort of information system in the tabulation phase. The same problems apply there as well. So it's absolutely universal for the analog world as well.
Andrew.
Yeah, I think, well, my particular area of interest, for those of you who've read my book, is the responsibility and role of government in regulating, especially private tech. you're seeing that come to the fore this year with the GDPR in Europe about how to create data protection law to regulation to protect consumers and to empower them in their data rights. I think antitrust is increasingly relevant in Europe with Vestager's investigation of Google. I think Vestager's finding of Apple and forcing these companies to behave responsibly in terms of paying tax is important. And I think the German government's new laws about forcing Facebook to become a media company and be accountable for the garbage that gets published on the platform is also the beginning of a responsible regulation of these user-generated platforms. And I think in the longer run, the biggest challenge of the early part, and perhaps for much of the 21st century, is to what extent we regulate AI. Where do we say enough is enough? Where do we say you can't do this? And all sorts of other sort of offshoots of this. At what point do we regulate augmented reality? At what point do we allow computer chips in our arms or our eyes or wherever else in our body to make us into a super specimen, a superhuman specimen? So I think the issue, governments are best at big issues. You can worry about, okay, can they build a blockchain? Big deal. But the only protection people have in the world against all this new technology is government. That's why we elect governments. That's why how it worked in the industrial age. Without government, you'd still have 11-year-olds in factories. Without government, you still wouldn't allow labor unions. Without government, there'd be no social security system. Another area that's very important to address is where you regulate jobs and whether you introduce minimum guaranteed income. So I think the age of government is returning. We can dismiss government people because they're slow, because they don't understand technology. But actually, when it comes down to it, this is all we have to protect ourselves from technology, which is now becoming so incredibly disruptive that it challenges us as a species. So I think if you're in government, we need you.
Andrew, thank you so much for those encouraging words to all the governments.
I don't know if they're
Mihkel,
encouraging.
Niels, thank you very much for the panel we had. It was the last one of this conference. Thank you once again, and I give floor back to
Thank you,
our Master of
gentlemen.
Ceremony.